Level 25.
Frontline.
Ooh, 35 minutes.
Lost the lead. We tied for the lead.
Oh, what?
Reloading.
Oh man. What
We've
happened to
taken
my
the lead.
control?
It's too close. Fight harder.
Very
We
good.
lost the lead. The enemy is jamming our radar. Heads up, team. Enemy UAV spotted. Target down!
Why am I lagging so much right now?
Be advised. Hostile Predator missile inbound. Predator missile inbound. Reloading.
Why am I lagging? Shit.
UAV online.
What have I done?
Enemy UAV spotted.
Turn it off.
Frag out! Reloading. Hostiles jamming our radar. Hostile Predator missile inbound. Friendly Predator killer drone deployed. Down! Enemy down! Stand by.
We're not gonna use that.
Heads up. Enemy UAV spotted. Hunter killer drone deployed. The enemy is jamming our radar. We tied for the lead. UAV online. We've taken the lead. Reloading. Headshot. Friendly hunter killer drone deployed.
Target down! Changing mag! Cover me!
I'm lagging so much.
Changing mag! Tango down! Reloading!
Hunter killer drone deployed. Friendly predator missile inbound. Hunter killer drone on standby.
Enemy down!
Predator missile awaiting orders. Predator missile inbound.
Tango down! Enemy down!
Friendly hunter killer drone deployed. Objective almost complete. Keep it up. Counter UAV up. They're blind. We're almost there. Keep it up.
Reloading!
Control.
Boom! Headshot!
Nice work. Well done.
Yeah, 26 kills. This guy's got 27. It's good. Let's. I think I need to adjust the resolution. I'm lagging so much.
Frontline.
Okay. Same map.
Grenade!
Taking the lead.
Tango down! Changing mag! Cover me!
Same map. Oh, oh, oh.
Changing mag! Oh!
Oh, this too then. Why am I lagging so bad? This wasn't like this.
Tango down! Reloading! Grenade out! Reloading! Changing mag! Cover me! Target down! Reloading! Target down!
Hunter killer drone on standby.
Reloading!
Friendly hunter killer drone deployed.
Target's in sight!
fudge. I almost forget.
Reloading. Tango down. Cover me. Reloading.
Hunter killer drone ready for deployment.
I'm down. Reloading. Changing back. Cover me.
Orders. Hunter killer drone deployed.
Reloading. Target down.
Spotted. Hostile hunter killer drone inbound. Hostile gem
Enemy
area.
down.
Hunter killer drone on standby. Counter UAV is up. Good work. Friendly hunter killer drone deployed. Be advised, hostile care package inbound.
Oh, I can still go.
Let's
On
do
them.
them.
We're winning this one.
Oh,
Predator missile inbound.
wow,
Hunter killer
there's
drone deployed.
only one.
Frag.
Enemy SAM detected.
Down. Tango down.
Enemy SAM detected.
He died it.
No, I already write the 10.
Just another day. Good job.
So all the check.
Oh, I only got 17 kills.
Invited them.
That's a shame.
This is your invitation. Just simple. Put it on this? Yeah, I already have it here. See? I already have it here. There's no more. I'm sitting here since I came home.
Front line.
Come on, I'm coming.
Reloading. Reloading.
The yellow class.
Let's go to party.
Why, you know some of the yellow class? You have friends in yellow? You have friends in yellow class?
Let's go to party again.
Lost the lead.
Bad shooting.
It's too close. Fight harder.
Reloading.
Taking the
Tango
lead.
down!
We tied for the lead.
Got shot!
We've taken the lead.
Target down!
It's too close. Fight harder. Hunter killer
Tango
drone
down!
on standby.
Reloading.
Ready to jam enemy UAV. We've taken the lead. Tied for the lead. We lost the lead. It's too close. Fight harder. Hunter killer drone deployed.
Contact with enemy!
We lost the lead.
Bad idea. There's a guy there.
Enemy down! Changing mag! Target down!
Ooh, look.
Tango down!
Hunter killer drone ready for deployment.
Reloading.
Buddy.
Friendly hunter killer drone
Bye.
deployed.
Changing mag! Cover me! Enemy down!
Tied for the lead.
Reloading.
Lost the lead.
Enemy down!
It's too close. Fight harder. We've taken the lead. It's up team. Enemy spotted. Hunter killer drone on standby.
Enemy down!
Missile awaiting orders.
Reloading.
Hunter killer drone deployed. Friendly hunter killer drone deployed. Predator missile inbound. Friendly predator missile inbound.
Target down!
Counter UAV up. Blind.
Ooh, got liquor. Shame.
Tango down!
Keep on them. We're winning this
Able to
one.
go twice.
Enemy UAV spotted.
Go!
Hunter killer drone deployed.
Reloading.
UAV online.
Boom.
Fatality.
Done.
What's this? Let's go.
Ooh, la, la.
Reload! Enemy down!
Okay. You can ask your teachers.
No, 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 no.
We've taken the lead. Tied for the lead.
I told you so.
Oh. There was one guy up
We've
there.
taken the lead. Heads up. Enemy UAV spotted.
Oh, baby.
It's too close. Fight harder. We've taken the lead.
Reloading.
Be advised. Hostile hunter-killer drone inbound. UAV
that?
online.
No.
Friendly hunter-killer drone deployed.
Boom, 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 boom. What?
Reloading.
Where are they? Where are they? Is there a guy here? I knew it.
Obvious noobs.
What?
Be advised. Hostile predator missile inbound.
Cover me! Reloading! Target down!
Hostile hunter-killer drone inbound.
Changing
Enemy
mag!
UAV
Cover
spotted.
me!
What the heck?
UAV online. Heads up, team. Enemy UAV spotted. Predator missile inbound.
Target down! Enemy down! I'm down! Target down!
No, I'm not gonna use the.
When you Prince, when you give this invitation to
Be
your friends,
advised. Hostile hunter-killer drone
because we need to know who will come.
Oh, there you are.
Reloading!
Nah.
Enemy down!
No, we're not gonna celebrate. We're gonna celebrate.
Hostile predator missile inbound.
That's why we need.
Oops.
Friendly predator missile inbound.
Okay?
UAV online. Objective almost complete. Keep it up. Hunter-killer drone deployed.
The play area you had last year.
Enemy down!
So stupid.
Like that.
Hey, hey.
That's why we need the right head count. Let me know how if they will go.
Boom! Headshot!
Okay?
Enemy UAV spotted. Keep fighting.
dodged.
Hostile hunter killer drone inbound. We tied for the lead. We lost the lead.
What the heck? Oh, that's the first defeat.
Ako na, ang dakilang martir.
Those guys are good. Good.
Return to base.
My God, I don't have my glasses.
We need some bags. We need some bags for children.
Front line.
Let's go. Nuclear launch detected. I got a grenade. I got a pistol. I got a UAV. Oh, there they are.
We lost the lead.
Target down!
Tied for the lead.
Down!
Taking the
Enemy
lead.
down!
Hunter killer drone ready for deployment. Jam any UAV.
Let's go!
Nada de dar. Padum Torinas.
It's too close. Fight harder. Hunter killer drone deployed. Taking the lead.
Boom! Headshot!
Where is it?
Tango down! Headshot!
Hunter killer
Enemy
drone
down!
down.
Sniper eliminated!
Squad standby.
Reloading!
Friendly hunter killer drone deployed.
Guess it's time to call the nuke.
Friendly Predator missile inbound. Hostiles jamming our radar.
And didn't kill anyone. Oh, I got one. Oh, that's good.
That's what you get.
Sniper down! Enemy down! Reloading!
Missile awaiting
Headshot.
orders.
Reloading! Tango down!
Heads up. Enemy UAV spotted.
Sniper down! I'm down! Ah!
Oh, it's time to call the nuke again.
Predator missile inbound.
And
The enemy is jamming our
There's only
radar.
one guy?
Hostile Predator missile inbound. Counter UAV is up. Good work.
Cover me! Reloading!
UAV spotted. Hostiles jamming
Sniper
our radar.
eliminated!
Hunter killer drone on standby. Friendly hunter killer drone deployed. Advised.
Enemy
Hostile
down.
Predator missile inbound.
Tango down!
Jamming UAV. Predator missile on standby.
Target down! Reloading!
Oops.
Tango down!
Heads up, team. Enemy UAV spotted.
Where is he? He's gone.
Killer drone ready for deployment. Hunter killer drone deployed.
Sniper down! Ah!
it's time to call again.
Friendly Predator missile inbound.
Target down!
Miles complete. Keep it up.
Target down! Ah!
Keep fighting.
Tango down!
Hunter killer drone on standby.
Reloading! Cover me!
The taste of victory.
Nice work. Well done.
Forty-three.
Kills! How about we're gonna share this one? And share it to FB. Oh. Such a good. Nalaman sa manya.
Front line.
Rematch. The taste of victory. What's this?
Okay, let's try.
Let's try it.
Lost the lead.
Why wasn't I shooting? Oh man, I'm so bad at the snipers.
Enemy UAV spotted.
Oh, why I'm not running? No. No. There's one guy over there. What the heck?
Hostile
dead.
Predator missile inbound. Friendly Predator missile inbound.
Target down!
That's what you get.
Nope.
Heads up. Enemy UAV spotted.
Great.
No.
Tango down! Reloading.
Enemy UAV spotted. Be advised. Hostile hunter killer drone inbound.
What? What?
Birdie.
Oh, it's so laggy, that is why.
Heads up. Enemy UAV spotted. It's hunting. Enemy UAV spotted.
It's so...
Hostile hunter killer
Enemy
drone
down!
inbound. Be advised. Hostile Predator missile inbound.
Tango down!
Hostile care package inbound.
Birdie. Come on, come on.
Reloading.
Oh, there we go.
Tango down!
I'm getting used to it.
Reloading.
Enemy UAV spotted. Hunter killer
Enemy
drone
down!
on standby. Hunter killer drone deployed.
Get down!
Oh, nope.
UAV online.
Nope.
Ready to jam
Tango
enemy
down!
UAV. Predator missile on standby.
Killing yourself.
That happened.
Enemy down! Target down! Tango down! Enemy down!
Friendly hunter killer drone deployed.
Two.
Predator missile inbound.
It's time.
Friendly Predator UAV up. Blind. Pick it up, team.
Enemy down! Changing mag!
Did I put aim system?
We're losing this
Aim
fight.
six. Was there a name system?
So you're gonna
Aim.
tell them
What the heck?
wait early on Sunday.
That is why. That is why it's so hard for me to aim because the aim assist is on. But it's fine.
Early
What's
because
today?
today's Wednesday, October 2. Why?
Okay.
It's not yet, just 3 weeks more.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
On the wall.
Stop there.
I'm gonna call Daddy to pick it up and throw it away.
That it's going to be safe. Everything is going to be alright. Daddy can kill it.
Defeated. Don't let this happen again.
Bye! Why is our water?
Let's try it again.
Front line.
Reloading! Cover me!
That's more like it.
Changing mag! Changing mag! Cover me! Grenade out!
Let's try it again.
What? What the heck?
Flash out!
We lost the lead.
Hang on.
Reloading! Targets in sight! Tango down!
Nope. Nope.
Tango down!
Tango down!
I'm down!
Yeah, you're down! Ooh. Oh. Oh, why can't I run? And you're dead. Nope, nope,
It's a nice sniper.
nope.
Nice sniper.
Where are you?
Enemy down!
Oh, that one. My cat.
Oh! Nope.
Headshot! Tango down! shot.
Hunter killer drone on standby.
Reloading.
Bang.
Hunter killer drone deployed.
Changing mag.
Ready to jam enemy UAV.
Target down. Reloading. Cover me.
Yes, of course.
Predator missile awaiting orders.
Damn it. Ah, these guys. Where are you?
Target down.
Nope. Nope. Yep.
Enemy down. Reloading.
Let's call upon the Messiah.
Predator missile inbound.
Ah, there's only one guy. And there's nothing. Oh, I felt one guy.
Oh, I didn't see you, Dad.
Hmm.
Gunshot. Tango down.
On fire?
Nope. Nope.
Went on fire.
Yep. Nope. Yep.
Enemy down.
Ah.
I just died with a vehicle.
Heads up. Enemy UAV spotted. Friendly hunter killer drone deployed.
Nope.
Sniper down.
Nope.
I got shot.
Ooh. Oh, nope. 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 What the heck? Oh man. Nope. What? I hate that part. Nope. No, what?
Frag out. Sniper eliminated. Cover me. Reloading. Reloading.
Oh.
Enemy UAV spotted.
Okay.
Counter UAV up. They're blind. Be advised. Hostile hunter killer drone inbound. Be advised. Hostile predator missile
crap.
inbound.
Where is he?
I'm still touching the car.
Oh well. Oh crap.
We're failing this mission.
What?
Sniper down.
Oh. What?
Reloading. Cover me. Cover me. Reloading.
Those.
Tango down.
Can I go? No. Where are they? Ah, you're dead.
Target down.
Standby.
Oh, defeat.
Defeated. Pew.
Let's try another gun.
Profile. Stand down.
Stand down.
What do we have? AKS. RPD. Let's try this one. Nope. What's this? Suppressor. New fast magazine. Nope. No. Oh. What do we have here? War machine. No. No, we don't like that. Dead silence. Silent movement. Oh yeah. What's this? Chris my turn. Oh, yeah. This is my favorite. Ninja. No. What? Oh, this one? Perks.
Dead silence.
Dead silence is so useful for battle royale. Oh, we need to unlock until level 33. And what's this? Okay. Let's try this one.
Yeah.
Frontline.
Let's try shotgun.
What?
They might hear on my mic.
You're afraid? You are? Are you afraid?
Daddy?
Taking the lead.
That was a bad idea.
We've taken the lead.
It's the guy.
Too close. Fight harder.
I don't know how to use a
Lost the lead.
shotgun. That was so bad. What the heck?
Be
Headshot.
advised. Hostile hunter killer drone inbound.
Sniper down!
Oh, okay. This is how you use the shotgun.
Sniper eliminated!
Hunter killer
Tango
drone on
down!
standby. Ready to jam enemy UAV. Predator missile awaiting orders.
Oh, I'm beginning to feel it. I'm beginning to love the shotgun.
Heads up, team. Enemy UAV spotted. Hostile Predator missile inbound. Hunter killer drone deployed. Counter UAV is
Target
up.
down!
Hostile hunter killer drone inbound. Friendly Predator missile inbound.
Cover me, reloading!
Oh, there's only one. No. Where are they? Where are they?
Cover me! Sniper down! Reloading! Sniper eliminated! Boom! Headshot!
You dare to go on my turf.
Don't arrest.
You'll die.
Oh.
I'm gonna go back here.
Sniper down!
In that police car now.
Oh, yeah.
Fatality.
Ba't di sila nag-deploy?
Fatality.
Tango down! Sniper eliminated!
Animality.
Enemy down!
Ready for deployment.
Shot!
Missile on standby.
Sniper down!
It's time.
Predator missile
Shadow.
inbound.
Lalaro din yan.
Sniper eliminated!
We're losing this fight. Enemy UAV spotted. Friendly hunter killer drone deployed. Good up, team.
Launching na ako. Sino mag-VPN? Mag-VPN ka ba?
Be advised, hostile hunter killer drone inbound.
Ayan na si Shadow. Shadow. Kaya ako na lang.
Sniper eliminated!
Pa.
Be advised, hostile
Naka-VPN ba kayo kanina? Nag-AS lang kayo? Ayaw yung mag-VPN tayo?
Sniper down!
Ayaw kung ano? Team show.
Yeah, we almost
hunter killer drone deployed.
tayo. Lagi kami napapang-over.
What? No.
Another run anymore. Bumper car. Bumper car.
Correct.
Bumper car.
Si Earl, pumasok na yan eh. Sabi, gising na yan.
Bumper cars.
Si Tucker sa search.
Well,
Diba?
Naka-launching lang ako. Naririnig niyo ba ako?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Alright.
Shadow tayo.
Defeat it. Don't let this happen again.
33 kills.
Binabag using that.
Hindi, wala na.
Hindi, katabi ko kasi electric fan eh. Kaya
Lamig lang yan.
hindi tumatalab sa tabako.
Lalabas mo ba?
Ang lamig na ng hangin sa labas, no?
Ah,
Elijah's still here. And I was spawned a car. I'll train bunker guy. Bunker guy soon. Oh my goodness.
Front line. Lost the lead. It's too close. Fight harder. Lost the lead. Tied for the lead. Lost the lead. It's too close. Fight harder.
Oh, he's on a shotgun as well.
We've taken the lead.
Nope, 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 nope.
Enemy down! Boom! Headshot! Tango down! Enemy down!
Oh, dude.
Enemy down! Reloading, cover me!
Hunter killer drone deployed.
Tango down! Sniper down! Enemy down! Enemy down!
Bad idea.
Changing mag! Enemy down! Target down!
Fatality.
No. Yep.
Enemy in sight! Cover me!
This could be fun.
Target down! Enemy down!
Ah, it's done. Pew.
Mission accomplished. Good work. Front line.
Oh, this is nice for the shotgun. Ooh, what?
We've taken the lead.
Potato.
Lost the lead.
Potato.
Target down!
That's what you get.
Enemy down! Target down!
Too bad.
Lost the lead.
I'm just rolling around.
Enemy UAV spotted. Be advised, hostile hunter-killer drone inbound.
Boing. Boing.
Cover me! Reloading! Tango down! Target down! Enemy down! Tango down!
Hunter-killer drone deployed.
Lagi.
Ready to jam enemy UAV. Predator missile awaiting orders.
Target down!
Team hit. Spotted.
Enemy down!
Hostile hunter-killer drone inbound. Advised, hostile predator missile inbound.
Tango
It's time.
Predator missile inbound.
Hang on.
Friendly hunter killer drone deployed.
Enemy down! Tango down! Target down!
Tied for the bring it up, squad. We lost the lead.
But we lost the lead.
It's too close. Fight harder. Lost the lead.
Tango down! Down!
Tied for the
Tango
lead.
down!
Lost the lead.
Right, that's it for now. Play again tomorrow.